Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for this conversation with the amazing Anya von Gosling as part of the Bealtaine celebrations happening across Ireland this month. Anya, thank you so much for your time today. We're pre-recording this just to make sure there's no issues with technology. But you've had an amazing career over the past 60 odd years, um, going right back to sort of your time working in the fashion industry in New York in the 60s. But I think in terms of the conversation today, we'll start in Bremen in 1971 and your decision with your husband to open your first gallery. So tell me, in terms of what led you to open a gallery, what was the driving force behind that? And then you might talk to us about some of the amazing artists that you worked with during that decade.
Well, that was very simple because he had gotten as a gift two big portfolios. He was working with his mother at the time in Bremen in fashion. And he got this two folios, one of prints by Picasso and the other one by Dali. So it was actually a very valuable gift that his grandmother, I think, had given him. And suddenly, while looking at them, he said, I think I'm going to start a gallery. Of course, he needed somebody to work with him. And I had told him I knew how to type. Of course, I didn't. And he kept me anyway. So it went from there because Bremen at the time didn't have many galleries who showed contemporary art. It was a little bit more rooted in history and, of course, reworking of the art that Beckman did, and so on and so forth. And we had in mind something new. We wanted to use our good luck, the two portfolios, to sell them, to have more capital. And then we came across Les Levine. And it turned out later that Les and I had met previously in Dublin. So he came over and he was happy I could speak English. And our first contemporary work was Les Levine. And it was a very interesting thing. He made an installation pretending our gallery was a restaurant on Gramercy Park in New York City. So people from New York might remember this. I have a lovely piece of this particular thing here. And that really gave us a push in the backside to the success of this show. All of a sudden, a whole world opened up for us and we got the bug. We were constantly looking for new artists. My husband went to New York. There were a lot of artists who didn't have galleries. Nobody wanted to know, for instance, the so-called photorealists, because it was a time when minimalism was more it, and photorealists were sort of looked down on. It was not exactly what people in the galleries wanted, but we early on developed a like for things that people didn't want in the beginning. We took risks, and so we showed all of them, and we became their almost unique representative in Europe, and had the fantastic help of Ivan Karp, of a wonderful gallery in Soho, and a man with fantastic experience, and who gave us a leg up and helped us, and because he was representing all of them in America, and he went through the same experience but made a big success of it. So we were his European base, more or less. We sometimes didn't even know what he sent us, but we were always trusting his judgment. So we ended up with all the big photorealists,
Yeah.
and including later on Chuck Close. And people who came in the second wave of photorealism. So,
I mean,
so
looking at the list of artists that you worked with during that time, I mean, there are some like amazing artists that you worked with from New York at that time.
mhm.
The likes of Dwayne Hanson, John Cage, Dwight
Yes,
Twombly, Yves Klein,
yes,
Jasper Johns, Robert Rauschenberg. It's an
yes.
amazing list of artists. I mean,
Well, we didn't work with Rauschenberg, but we got his work. In other words, other people handled his work, but we bought from them and showed it because we moved our gallery from Bremen to Hamburg, and there we had a wider audience, and there was already a group of collectors there, which Bremen was a little bit short of. And so we showed everybody there. We showed the wonderful portfolio that Jasper Johns did with Beckett, for instance, and these were all new things. We showed Marco Morley that people were very difficult, found it difficult to work with, but we loved his work. I mean, it was getting on and on. It was fantastic, and
yeah,
and Dwayne, of course, was a steady in our life. And of course, some of these artists became our friends, and we brought them over to stay in Germany for a while, and we got them the DAAD scholarship in Berlin, for instance. And so they were close to us, and we had something that I always find very important, uh, a real relationship, not just a business one, but also a family relationship. So we ended up visiting them, meeting other artists through them. In fact, most of the best artists we met was always by one artist saying, "Hey, you ought to go to so and so studio in New York. They're great." And sure enough, sooner or later, we saw them in Hamburg.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And in Hamburg, the same thing happened. Then later, our gallery was deemed to be too slick and too elegant and too nouveau riche, maybe for artists. And they complained and they said, "Oh, this needs to be more brutal," and so on. So we ended up in Cologne, and that was a wonderful decision because Cologne, if you might know, in the 1970s, really was the top. It was the most liveliest place for contemporary art. And no doubt about it, even the New York Times had to admit that. They did in one of their magazines a cover shot of the Cologne Cathedral saying, "Is this the center of the art world?" Well, for a while it was. And a lot of the big American artists like Sarah and Wiener and so on, they all got their start up in that area. So it was wonderful to be part of that.
Talking about um, Richard Serra and Lawrence Wiener, I mean, the next stage in your career in the sort of 1980s, you were working on Rosk and you
Yes.
were the administrator.
Yes, I worked with him in Rosk because people didn't know what to do with him. He was a rather difficult person to deal with, and they had told him that they had the people who could make his work, but there was no such thing at the time. So we had to invent something, and the result of this invention there that we cooked up more or less is to this day in the cobblestones of Dublin, but so far I haven't seen in all these years not even a postcard of this work. It's a major piece by him. And the same with Lawrence Weiner, who made a piece at Rosk on the wall, but nothing was happening. In other words, nothing was promoted, which really annoyed the hell out of me because they're just wonderful artists. And Sarah didn't even want to stay for the opening. He was so, thrilled, in a negative way, because
Yeah,
yeah, the only one who knew what he was doing was my friend Oliver Dowling. So, and so the whole thing developed in a very fantastic way because in the art world, I think you live in a parallel world yourself. I feel that I live in two worlds, the art world and the real world. And one thing comes to the other, and people, if you do a good job, people, artists recommend you,
Of
and
course.
they say, why don't you go and see so and so? And I'm very happy doing what I'm doing, because I'm now working here in Ireland for a long time, and I've been able to build up something really wonderful for myself, which is a little bit selfish, maybe, to say that.
No,
But
I think what's obvious to me in
mhm,
knowing you and reading about your career is that you said you're selfish, but I would argue you're the opposite because you've always put the artist first. It's never been
yes,
about Anya von.
yes,
It's never been about
yes.
Anya von Gosling's name and lights. It's always been about the artists and bringing great artists to
Well,
the
yes,
audience. You know,
this is here. You see, when I had the gallery in Dublin, which was almost all the 90s, I always picked artists that didn't have an audience yet, more or less.
yeah,
That always interested me much more than the ones that were well known and shown. I mean, that's a different area altogether. But I think in the gallery we had, which I ran for a friend of mine who owned McCullough's shop there, um, and who supported me greatly. He said, anything you want to do, Anya, do it. So I did. And so Iolantis came about, for instance. That was a prime example of this kind of thinking. Nobody wanted to show Sean Hillen. I guess they were afraid, maybe, because it was a very political kind of thing at the time. The troubles in Ireland were still really, really bad, and as you only know too well. And so we put this show up, and it was a huge success for him.
well,
Uh,
I can tell you that I was a young art student in the 90s, and
mhm,
I was studying in London. But
mhm,
my I came to Dublin to see some exhibitions, and I remember going to see the Sean Hillen exhibition in your gallery, and
mhm.
I ended up writing about Sean in my thesis for my BA in fine art. So it was your influence in a sort of weird way that I'd never known Sean Hillen's work because, as you say, a lot of people just didn't know him, and certainly in London at that time, he was never heard of, you know. So it was really amazing to sort of come across such an amazing, important artist in Ireland.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, Sean was the one who took up a subject that nobody else wanted to touch. And that impressed me to no end. So naturally, I had to show him. And we were very lucky to get, two of his very good friends to actually be there at the opening. Mr. Heaney gave a wonderful opening speech, and that basically gave him a wonderful start for what he's doing now. I mean, we did another show in Camera 8 of his work, and that was successful as well.
Yeah,
But the first one was a very, very important thing for him.
of course.
And for me, the artist always comes first. For me, I'm not important in that fact. I'm just important in making it happen, maybe, and find people who want to make these things happen with me. But I'm not the important person there. The first thing is the artist happy with what I'm
Of course.
doing
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
with him? And that's my main concern. And that is one of the reasons, for instance, I might just tell you in this context here, uh, that I have given up being a gallerist. I was involved in a gallerist for what, 50 years or so. Uh, I think now my brief is something else, Eamon. It is helping artists to achieve what they think they want to
Of
achieve.
course. Yeah, yeah,
And that is something that gives me great joy. And when I get up in the morning, I feel very happy that maybe there's another day coming up where something like this is happening, and this is what I'm doing now. And I feel that living where I do, in Wexford, which is now a county that suddenly is booming and is just discovered the arts, and there's a place for me or somebody like
Of
me
course,
who
yeah,
has,
yeah,
yeah, who has experience and can pass that on to others. And that is my aim now. So, having a small gallery with two people for a while was a good idea, but what I'm doing presently, I feel is even a better idea. And all the artists, some of whom died, much to my great regret, because I would have liked to introduce them to Ireland and show them here. Um, I guess this is this is our fate, that all of a sudden we look in the newspaper and somebody else you worked with has died, like Dwayne Hanson, for instance, who died very early. I would have liked to show his work here as a whole. We lent two pieces to Rosk at one time, but that isn't enough to show, because he was always, a little bit maligned by people who said, "Well, what the hell is this? This looks like mannequins in a showcase in a fashion shop or in a department store." What they didn't realize that he and Keenholz, they took up their art to make in 3 dimensions what life in America was all about. They very early on discovered the reality of America, and that was interesting us. That's why we showed his work, you
yeah.
know?
I'm curious to know about, in the sort of the noughties, as they call them now, that sort of 2001 to 2010. You worked with Jacob Mendel, who's
Yes,
an artist who I confess I don't know very much about. And also, up until 2004, you were working with Kent Flotter.
yes.
And obviously, you've got a strong interest in post-war American sculpture. Would that be
Mhm.
right to say? Has that been something that's been a, a moment in your career? Because obviously you worked with Richard Serra that we discussed earlier, but also people like Rauschenberg to a certain extent, Lawrence Wiener sort of straddles that sort of sculptural presence in a way. So is American sculpture one of the things that drives you or did drive you when you were working in galleries?
Um, to come back to the first thing that you mentioned there, some of the artists, the Jacob Mendel was a perfect example to what I said. His professor in Parsons, which to me is still possibly the best school of art in New York, took me aside one time. We were showing his work, and he said, "There is a guy I want you to meet. Take a look at his drawings." And I did. And we worked together for 12 years. And recently I have taken him on again. And to my great happiness, a wonderful piece of his is in the permanent collection in Emma, and also in some private collections in Dublin. So that makes me very happy, and him as well. And it is like Kent, for instance, was an artist who was a difficult person for many people to deal with, but I had absolutely no problem with him. So we did a wonderful show. If I use the word wonderful a lot, that means because it was. we got an offer to show in two venues in Venice, and on the same night we had the opening, one on Dorso Duro and the other one on Giudecca. So once they had been to the first opening, they had to go into the Vaporetto and see the next one, and that was a fantastic experience as well. Something to do more often, maybe in other places, maybe in other European places. I have some sort of an idea about doing something in Spain or maybe in Croatia. Um, with Irish artists, maybe possibly replicate some idea like that, have something in three venues at once by the same artist, but use historical buildings. Anyhow, I have many ideas right now and I can't do them all. There's no time. Um, well, there's no time, but mainly there's no money to.
That's true. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So then jumping forward to sort of 2010, you you sort of worked on the Eileen Gray Society of Ireland. So tell me what prompted you to set that up with the other two?
This is sort of fun because when I ran the gallery in Dublin, which I don't remember, you might remember the McCullough's jeans shop. Do you remember this?
No.
There was down on Suffolk Street, and in that space, it was, just a really good space, and it attracted a lot of architects who came to visit me there just to look at the work or maybe buy something or just look. And two people came there, one after the other, and one was Raymond Ryan, an architect who taught in UCD at the time, and the other one is my friend Jerk Hardy. In fact, they're both friends. Who is a director of Grafton Architects. So we became great friends, and we always complained that nobody ever had thought of making a real museum for her. Why did nobody, if the OPW and so on, go and try to put their money into the building, Brownswood House in Enniscorthy, which really surprised me because even in Enniscorthy at the time when I moved here, hardly anybody knew what she was doing. Whereas in Germany, we had some of her items that she produced, originals, and I just couldn't believe it. So anyhow, we had these kind of talks all the time. And then we founded the Eileen Gray Society, which only ever had 3 members, just the 3 of us. It was not meant to be a real institution of any shape, but it just was meant to be a place or 3 people who constantly reminded people in Ireland that this is a very important woman, and internationally. And then one day I had a phone call when I had the gallery by a director of the Museum for Art and Design in Frankfurt. And they had inherited or gotten somehow some contents of her apartment after she died, and they didn't have enough room for it, and they already had some Eileen Gray, I believe. So they said, would you, because the man who ran it knew me from Hamburg, and he said, would you ask the Irish government to buy these, Anya? And well, I went from Pontius to Pilate to everybody. From everybody in Dublin, everybody was sick and tired of me. I would call them up and say, listen, I have access to that, and the whole lot will cost 20,000. I think it was still pounds at the time. Well, the bad news was that there wasn't a single person interested.
Mm.
Then one day, I actually walked on the street somewhere there, thinking whatever I was thinking, and Dorothy Walker crossed me, and she said, "You look rather strange, Anya. Let's go and have some coffee. You look a little bit, not yourself." So I told her the whole story, and we then discovered that that year, Frankfurt had in their book fair, they had dedicated Ireland. Ireland was the honored country that year, everything about Ireland. And she called, I think it was Kieran Benson, but from the Arts Council, and the two of them flew over there, and they met Mr. Wang, who was the man who was at the time the director there and offered this. And that's how the whole thing arrived. The collection arrived in the museum, in the National Museum. And
Amazing story.
yeah, and I've always kept on this idea of, having a website, which is now discontinued now, but sort of carrying the thing for her. And I still haven't given up the idea that there must be somebody in County Wexford who would like to have more in Wexford, where she was from, after all, right smack there in Enniscorthy. We did actually lecture in Enniscorthy in the Building Society once, and 91 people showed up. It was very nice. We did another thing with Grafton Architects in the Wexford Art Centre, which was lovely, where the the founders gave a wonderful lecture, but nothing happened. So when it came time to get the house, Brownswood House, it was turned into a school, which is very nice. But it would have been a wonderful, wonderful idea to actually have Eileen Gray's Museum in the house she was born in. A room in the castle in Enniscorthy, as far as I'm concerned, is not enough.
Yeah, absolutely. Such an important character in terms of Irish art and design, and just was largely forgotten and ignored because she didn't live here. And like many female practitioners in the 20th century, their legacy is only comes to sort of fruition after their life, and it's still not enough. But listen, I want to move on to sort of talk about your more recent projects with Camera 8, with
Mm-hmm.
Here There, and also
Mm-hmm.
talk to us about your new initiative that you're working on in the Wexford Hub.
Yes, the thing is that how that came about, you probably want to know. My mother is from Wuppertal, my father from Cologne, so and I always had the dream. I don't know why I had that, but I do. That there is something here in County Wexford and in the Rhineland that connects them. I don't know what it is, but I know it's there. So maybe it has to do with Catholic religion in the case of Cologne, but in any case, I was lying in bed one night and I was thinking, wouldn't it be great to do a show with my friend Herr Grolle, who has a gallery in Wuppertal, with Irish art? So we started small, on a small number, with two artists that I like, two young friends, artists. Called Glue in his gallery in Wuppertal, which was very successful actually. Work was sold, much to my surprise and the artist's surprise. And out of that came a film called Glue, which was shown in Goldsmith, in Lismore Castle, at the IFI, and I'm dying to have it shown in Wexford because I have a small part in it. Haha. So
You have a very great cameo in it.
Well, I'm paying the older lover of a young gay man, so that in itself is a giveaway, right? So, but it's a very short thing because the really terrific young people are the main thing, and the best one of them all is. Mr. Farley, who is an outstanding actor, turned out to be. So you might want to see it when it finally arrives in Wexford. Um, it was done entirely on an iPhone, which is even more encouraging to young artists when they hear this. It's very good quality. And Oisin Byrne, an artist as well, who is now living in England, did the whole thing. And there was no script. Yeah, we would just sit down someplace and he'd say, well, talk a little bit about whatever. And that's what we did. We had absolutely no idea what was next. And that appealed to me as well. And it worked very well. So anyhow, that was the first time this happened. And Herr Grolle was very pleased, the gallery owner. And then we thought, well, how about doing something on a bigger scale? And suggest that. And luckily, I'm working with very enlightened and terrific people in County Wexford. And you probably have met them and know who they are, and they know who they are. And we have Liz Burns, who is outstanding, and we have Catherine Bow, and we have now a new, very, very yes, a new person who is also very enthusiastic, and we have a terrific director of the art center, Elizabeth White, who lived in and worked in New York, like myself, and so it's just something very wonderful. So that's
So
happening,
to sort of
and
close off this conversation, because I'm just aware of people's time, tell us about your current work that you're doing now in the sort of Wexford hub, which I know is not a gallery. You sort of said that you've stopped being gallerist in the old-fashioned sense, but you're now more interested in sort of continuing your lifelong commitment to working with living emerging artists, uh,
yes.
but also maybe in different disciplines as well. Is that right?
Well, well, you see, Eamon, I feel, for instance, I have a funny habit of sitting in my desk there, and an artist I like comes in just to talk with me, and suddenly I might say to them, I'm going to go to Cologne to the art fair. Do you want to come? And then, so far, nobody has turned me down. Even though I tell them I have no money to give you, I can't sponsor this, they don't care. They want to come. And I have to say it has been very successful, this for everybody, and makes me also very happy, because to see what an effect seeing another world, which is, Cologne, for instance, with this fantastic background of for showing contemporary art. What it has on the artists when they come back. It's life changing for an artist to see this and travel. And nobody has minded so far that we have to go to Airbnbs or whatever. And it's all done on a shoestring, but they get to see the best museums and the best collections. And one time I went with a group of 5, and we even ended up in the secret storeroom of Michael Werner's gallery in Cologne, which are things that normally don't happen. So this is another thing, part of my little master plan, how to conduct the rest of my life. Besides mentoring and so on, thinking up new new shows, new interesting things we can do, and also look at what is already here and maybe has been disregarded or people weren't aware from it. These are all things that interest me. What doesn't interest me is the chintzy art world uh, has developed, that where the first thing important is money. How much is it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That is not so interesting to me. And if work is good and if an artist is smart about how they, present themselves and so on, they eventually will make money. So and for galleries, for instance, one of my big sorrow is that you hardly ever see a gallery from Dublin getting into a car and coming to a place like Wexford, which is what, 110 kilometers from Dublin, and a nice day trip. They don't visit studios of artists here, which is completely alien to me, because I love visiting studios uh, and so on and so forth. This is all something that has to be considered and thought about, and that I'm working on.
Well,
Uh,
it's that's an amazing point to finish on. That for a woman of your age, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but you've had an amazing career, and lots of your peers will now just be sitting by the canal, drinking drinks and enjoying retirement. But you have you're showing no signs of giving up or of sort of resting on your laurels. You're taking this 50 odd years of experience and doing amazing things for artists in Wexford and Ireland. And I think that your point about Wexford becoming a kind of real amazing place for visual art. You named lots of other people, but you forgot to name yourself. The work you have done on Wexford over the past 40 years, whether it's with Eileen Gray, whether it's with Camera 8, whether it's with your work, other work you've done. It's been amazing, and I think you're one of the reasons why Wexford is so successful. So I know you're not a very ego-driven person, but I think you have to understand that you're very influential and you're very important, and we love and cherish you to bits. So I just want to say thank you so much for your time, Anya. And what we'll do now is we'll hand over to the audience for some questions. Thank
uh, I share with you as well, Eamon.
you. Absolutely. Okay. Thank you.